Everybody, my name is Evelyn of Pink Sheep Design, and it is my first live on Instagram of 2023. Woohoo! So that's super exciting. I do plan on bringing back Pink Sheep and Friends live on Fridays, where I go live with other makers from the community. But to start out the year, you know, things are kind of crazy at the beginning of the year, kind of closing out the last year, moving into the new year. So I decided for the first couple of lives, at least maybe the first 2 months, I may just go live myself with some different topics. They may not be a full hour. They may, I don't know. I talk a lot, so it's easy for me to go for a full hour and, you know, talk to you guys. So I'm so glad you're here. Happy New Year. I hope that your January is starting off well. Let me know in the comments, let me know what you're working on. What is your first project of 2023? Maybe you haven't even started one. But if you have, I would love to know what you're working on. I still see a lot of temperature blankets happening, planning for those. I do see a lot of that still happening. I have not made one yet. I don't know if I will. I never say never. Maybe one day. I don't know. But cheers to the new year. We got my coffee. And Carrie and Max is making a garden flower beanie. That sounds amazing. I did want to show you guys, you may have already seen the reel, but I got a new, of course it's covered because I wanted to have my little cat coffee cozy on there. But I got a new travel mug from Redbubble. So this is from the Redbubble merch, and it is my Feeling Froggy. So I'm so happy with him. He makes me really happy. I needed one more travel mug that fit in my car mug holder because I have a big travel mug with a handle, but it doesn't fit in the car holder, like the cup holder in the car. So I needed one that would actually fit in my car with me, and I only had one that did. So new travel mug, who dis? Super excited. So today's topic is interesting. I have not done anything like this on Instagram Live before. I have done similar things on YouTube because on YouTube I tend to do more tutorials, crochet alongs, things like that. If you're not following me on YouTube, my channel is youtube.com/pinksheepdesign. So there you go. Be sure to check it out. Lots of other different kinds of videos there than what I post here. Zozo says, do you have any advice on suggested courses for learning how to write a pattern? Okay, so I actually have what is called the Pattern Writer's Handbook that you can purchase in my Etsy shop. It is a digital PDF download. It is like 30 pages, chock full of all the information you need to go from an idea in your head to a published successful pattern. So if you need that kind of resource, I gotcha. So just check out my Etsy shop and you can search Pattern Writing Handbook. It should come up. If you cannot find it, shoot me a message and I can send you the direct link. But that should be exactly what you need. And I have looked at doing maybe a video tutorial, but I'd really just be talking about it. So I really think that handbook would break it down very well for you. So check that out. But today we are doing a live yarn review. So I have never done a live yarn review here on Instagram, but this was the perfect opportunity because Premier sent me some of this very plush big yarn. It's really pretty. It's very soft, beautiful purple color. And they have, let's see, I'll show you guys the insert that it came with. If I can find it. Of course, that's not where it should be. Oh, there it is. Okay. So this is the insert that came with it. It is considered a jumbo size 7 yarn, recommended hook size 25 millimeter. And I want to do a quick breakdown of that. Okay, so jumbo yarn is kind of its own world of yarn. And not all jumbo yarn is created equal. Now, you could say the same thing for other weights of yarn. So like some super bulky yarn may feel more like a bulky yarn. So I think all of the categories have a little bit of bend and sway when it comes to just how light or heavy the yarn is. But jumbo yarn spans a huge range of hook sizes. So some jumbo yarn, and that's why the recommended yarn size on jumbo yarn is so important. If you are looking for a size 7 weight jumbo yarn, you need to look at the recommended hook size, because if a pattern designer, so let's say you buy a pattern and it calls for a jumbo yarn weight. If they picked a jumbo yarn that called for a 25 millimeter hook and you buy a jumbo weight yarn that recommends an 11.5 millimeter hook, you're not going to have a good time. You're probably going to end up having to double up that 7 weight yarn in order to match the designer's gauge. So that's why the recommended yarn weight is so important. Hey, the captain, come say hey. Say hey. Hey, look, hey. Our hair matches today. He's got those natural curls. Hey, have fun.
Fucking car drove through the cigar store, so they're closed, so we're shutting that down.
Oh my gosh! Okay,
yeah,
well.
I guess they hit a power pole. He happened to check Facebook, and they're closed today.
Whoa. Well, if y'all decide to hang out, have fun.
Yeah.
Have
fun, YouTube people, Instagram people, Twitter people.
He was having a guy's morning this morning, which meant I got to film a bunch of videos for YouTube. Woohoo! So, back to our yarn conversation. It calls for a 25 millimeter hook. So, for instance, which is, I'm going to get to this later too, but my Power Puff jacket pattern calls for a 7 weight, jumbo 7 weight yarn that recommends on the label a 25 millimeter hook. So this should work for my Power Puff jacket, and I decided to try because they sent me 3 balls of this. Premier sent me 3 of these, and you actually get quite a bit of yardage with this. You get 98 yards. So since I'm making a smaller size, I'm going to make the extra small / small size. I should only need 3 of these. So I'm really excited because they sent me enough, hopefully, to make an entire jacket out of this. And I've always loved my Power Puff jacket, but I thought it would be really cool to have it in this really fluffy style yarn. So I've already started working on that, and that's what I'm going to share with you guys today. And I'm going to go through some of the tips that have made my life a little easier when I'm using this really fluffy style yarn. So I wanted to show you guys the colors because they did send me this insert. So they've got the heather color, which is what I've got, evergreen, see, I can't read that, petal, ruby, goldenrod, white, teddy, and what is that, lichen? Yeah, nope, and there's more. What does that say? Mushroom and country blue. There you go. Okay, so quite a few colors. This is a limited time only yarn. So if you do want to check it out, you do have to go ahead and order yourself some because it's not going to be around forever. But like I said, I'm hoping that this is going to be perfect for the Power Puff jacket because like I said, I've always wanted another one that has that kind of furry look to it. Okay, let me make sure that I have not missed any questions. I know Ellen, bummer about the store. I know, they wanted to go. I'm glad they checked it first though, so they didn't show up and it was closed. And Mingster says hello from Canada. Welcome. Thanks for joining. Okay, so be sure if you have questions and you don't want me to miss your question, please put your questions in the question box. So it's down here, bottom of the screen, right there. It's got a little comment box with a little question mark in there. You can put your questions in there and make sure that I don't miss them. So if you have specific questions about this yarn, about the Power Puff jacket, about working with this yarn, please pop them in the question box because that is what today's video is all about. this yarn and working with yarn that is similar to this. Now I did want to show you guys, let me see where I put it. Okay, so I also have this yarn, and the USPS is here. If you hear the dogs barking or going crazy in the background, that's what that is. This is Premier Bunny. Now Premier Bunny is very similar. This is what it looks like. So if we just held these side by side, very, very similar. But Bunny recommends a 15 millimeter crochet hook. I can show that. 15 millimeters, and you get 87 yards. Okay. So a little less yardage, a little bit lighter weight, but it is constructed almost identically. So it's got the thread running down the bottom, and it's got the fringe coming off of one side. And if we look at, let's see if I can find this really quick, because I already have this open so I can show you guys. And actually, if I look at this a little bit closer, so you guys can see here, the Very Plush Big is constructed in a very similar way, but there is so much of this fluff that you almost can't see the center thread. Do I have a delivery?
This might be my unboxing.
Oh, okay. Interrupting again.
Isn't it awesome when I'm at home on Fridays?
Mm-hmm. What did you get? Oh, he did get a goodie today. Uh-huh.
How about them fucking dogs?
Can you stop using that language on here? I'm not going to be able to put this on YouTube's. Mm-hmm. He has no filter. But that has kind of rubbed off on me, but I still, you know, I know. Okay, so we have, like I said, inner cord here, fluffiness here, and with this one, like I said, there is so much fluff here that you almost can't see the inner cord. Whereas when you look at Bunny, you can clearly see that it's almost like a fringe. So that's a big difference there already. And that is one of the reasons why this one recommends such a larger hook, because there is so much more bulk to this portion of the yarn that it makes that big of a difference. Now, I do have to say, don't be surprised when you're using this yarn. If you decide to purchase this yarn and try it out, I know that there are a few knots throughout it, so you won't have to change balls of yarn that often, but you will find knots in this yarn where they have combined two different pieces. Now, because it's so fluffy, it's not like you're going to see the knot. I think that's why it's interesting. It's going to be a little bulkier when you go across that yarn, but it's not going to, for me, it hasn't caused any issues. There are also going to be areas where it's knotted, and the knot, and I don't have an example to show you, but the knot, there's not any fluffiness on it. It's just the inner cord that has been tied together. So you may get a span of about 1 inch that doesn't have any fur on it. But again, I've seen 2 of those since using one of these, and I am working with this right now, and I'm going to flip the camera around so you guys can actually see, but it's so fluffy. This is almost like a bath mat. So if you guys have one of those super fluffy bath mats, you won't be able to see those little sections that don't have any fur on them, because it didn't cause any kind of interruptions in the fluffiness of the finished piece. But don't be surprised if you find them. If you purchase this, there are going to be knots throughout. Some knots will be knotted with the fur. Some will just be a cord that has like a double knot across the cord. You may also see changes in the consistency of the actual fur. So there were some that were even fluffier, and I'm going to be able to show that a little bit more easily once I flip the camera around. But some of them are, it's almost more dense than the other sections. Now, it's not enough for me to say, ooh, that's way too much of a difference. It makes the entire thing look different from one section to the other, but it's noticeable when you're working with it. So like when you're working with it with your hook, there are going to be sections that feel, and it's like chunks. So like I said, it's almost like the sections that they had to tie together, one of them might have a little bit more density than the other one. But so far, I'm enjoying using it. So, you know, if you've thought about it, and I would say if you've used furry yarn before, because it's definitely a challenge. And that's what I'm going to get into now. So like I said, if you have questions about this yarn, about using this kind of fluffy yarn, please be sure to pop them in the question box and I can make sure I answer those or kind of show you what I can show you with this yarn. So with that being said, I'm going to flip the camera around and we're going to get to our tips. All right. And actually, before I flip the camera around, the first most important tip when using this kind of yarn or this kind of yarn or any yarn that's going to make it nearly impossible for you to see your stitches is to just be patient. Be patient, take your time, you know, really take the time to get used to the yarn, maybe work up a swatch first so you can kind of feel out what it's going to feel like. Don't start out with a really difficult pattern. Start out with something simple like a blanket or a pillowcase or a pillow. Don't start out with a wearable. I mean, you can, but it might be easier to start out with something that's just like a simple square, just to really get used to what it's like working with it. So that is my first and most important tip, is take your time, be patient, start out with something simple, start out with simple stitches. And I think that's why I really liked the idea of using this yarn for a Power Puff jacket, because my Power Puff jacket only uses single crochet stitches. So super, super simple stitches, super simple construction. So I felt like it was a good fit for this kind of yarn. So with that being said, let's flip the camera around. See if I can do that on here. All right. And we're going to turn this here. And then I am going to have to move this up so you guys can see more. So let's go for a little ride. And I'm going to adjust this a little bit. All right. There we go. That should be good enough, and I'm trying to make sure I can still see what I'm doing as well. And I may pull it a little bit closer to me. Let's move the light a little bit. Bear with me. Let me get this a little closer to me so that I can actually see what I'm doing. Okay, that's better. Make sure everything is in place. All right. Okay. All right, I think that's good. All right, so this is going to be hard to see, just as it's hard to see in person. If you're trying to work with this yarn, it's going to be hard to see on this too, but I'm going to try my best to show you guys what's happening here. So this is my Power Puff jacket, and if we look, I've got the back panel, so I'm going to scoot this over so you guys can see both sides. So this is one side of the back panel, the other side of the back panel, and then most of my patterns for jackets and sweaters and things like that work up like a big U shape. So I've got the back panel, and then I work these front panels off of the back panel. All right, so you can see the side here. There's the first front panel all the way down here. And same thing on the other side. Second front panel coming off of the back panel. All right, so this is where I am right now. I've already worked up this one. I connected for the second back panel, and that is where I'm going to be working today to show you guys. So the first thing I'm going to point out are the stitch markers. So stitch markers are your best friend when you're working with this kind of yarn because you're not going to be able to count your rows. So if you're looking at this, you know, you may be able to kind of see some definition here. You can see this definition, but I'm not always sure if that's 2 rows or 1 row. You know, you can kind of use your fingers to feel the bumps of each row, but it's not foolproof, you know. So if you look here, I've got stitch markers and I place them at the beginning of each row or the end. So these are worked back and forth. So when I start my first row, I'll place a stitch marker in that first stitch, work my row across, come up, work the second row, and place a stitch marker in that final stitch. Work the next first stitch, place the stitch marker, work across, back across, place a stitch marker. So that is how I make sure that I have the correct number of rows. Now, if you're working, this is only 6 stitches across, so it really, for me, is just enough for me to be able to feel for each stitch across the row. But if you are working a much longer row, if you're making a blanket, let's say, you can place stitch markers every 5 to 10 rows or stitches, every 5 to 10 stitches, so that if you lose count, you at least have your sections of 5 to 10 pieces that you can go back and count. And then you're not having to feel for every single stitch for like 100 stitches across. So using stitch markers is your best friend for these. And I will say our stitch markers that we have in our Etsy shop, these are the top selling ones. And these are actually, I would say, the best option when you're working with the jumbo yarn because they are our widest stitch marker. And instead of having to deal with trying to clasp it, they just open like this. And so when you are placing one, so let's come up close, let's find a stitch here. You can just take this piece and pop it over and it's in place. So it's just, they're easier to work with. They're meant for bulky yarn. You know, most of the tools in our Etsy shop were designed to use with the chunkier yarn. So I would recommend these if you enjoy working with this kind of yarn because it just makes it easier to use than some of the smaller stitch markers out there. Okay, so what I'm going to do for this one is I'm actually going to start by frogging this row back because I wanted to share some advice on if you do have to frog this kind of yarn. And then I'm going to rework this row so you guys can see what that's like for me. Now, I will point out before I start, one of my top tips for using this kind of yarn is to hold it double, if I can find it, with another strand of much lighter weight yarn. So this is a 3-weight yarn that I decided to hold double with this. It just adds a little bit more bulk to the actual cording here, and it makes it easier to feel for your stitches. All right, so that is a huge piece. That's something that has made working with this yarn a million times easier for me. You can see it over here where I started. I've got this second piece here. You can also use up to even like a 4-weight. So if I were to pick another yarn, if I did, because you guys know it's very rare for me to have a 3-weight yarn in my yarn stash. So for me, oh, and I just saw another Cloudy Day asked tips for keeping track of rows with this type of yarn. I hope that answered your question. Using the stitch markers is the very best way to do that. You can keep a row counter, but for me, I always forget to like click the button for the next row and then I forget, okay, well, did I do that or not? This is the best way to do it. Now, if you don't have stitch markers, you could even use scraps of contrasting color yarn, and I recommend contrasting color stitch markers. So that's one of the reasons why I have the yellow, is so that, because you see this little purple one right here really kind of blends in. So if you have a contrasting color, that makes it easier to see them. So if I were to choose another yarn, because this one is a variegated yarn, but again, it's so light that you can't see it. I mean, you can't see it through the fluff. If I were to choose a heavier weight yarn, so if I had a 4-weight, which I have quite a bit of 4-weight cotton in my stash, And I see the Crafty Silent Lamb says most of my stash is 3-weight. I'm not surprised. There's a lot of crocheters out there that love the lighter weight yarn, and I am not one of them, but that's okay. So this is a Lily Sugar and Cream cotton, and it would almost blend. Now it's not quite light enough. I actually have a lighter purple that I could choose, but you can choose a yarn that is a similar color so that way if there is a little bit of show through, it's not going to make a big difference because it's going to blend with the yarn. So for instance, when I used this yarn, I chose a bright pink Lily Sugar and Cream cotton to go with it. So that it, like I said, if I saw a little bit peeking through, it's not going to be a big deal. It's worth it, I promise, for you to do this. So finding another lightweight yarn, something that maybe is a similar color combo, or light enough, like a 3-weight, to where you're just not going to see through this to see that other stitch. So super helpful. All right, so let's start with frogging. If you're going to have to frog this type of yarn, the main thing again is to be patient and don't try to do it too quickly. So if you're doubling up your yarn, make sure that you have a grip on both strands evenly, right? So I've got both of these in here, and pull gently. And if you're pulling and you hit a snag where it's just not coming undone, try different angles. So that tends to help me a lot. And again, making sure I'm holding both strands evenly. I'm trying to pull at different angles to make it easier. You don't want to try to force it. This yarn is pretty hefty. The inner cord seems like it'd be really strong, so I'm not worried about it snapping, but not all of these yarns are created equal. So you don't want to end up snapping your yarn when you're doing this and then having to tie a knot, because tying knots with bulky yarn is really not very much fun. Every now and then you have to do it. Like I said, let's see if I can find, I thought that there was, I think right here, there's a knot right here, because you can see there's a little bit of a bump here. But again, the yarn is so fluffy that even if you have knots, where it's either knots that were created here in the actual ball of yarn, or if you had to change yarn balls over, it's really not very noticeable. You might be able to feel it, but you're not going to be able to see it, if you're just looking at the project. All right, so I have frogged this back one row, and this is, let's see, I think this stitch marker was denoting that row, so I'm going to take that out. All right. Making sure, and again, just double checking everything when you're working with this yarn. Make sure that when you put your hook into it that you've got both of your strands. You can see both my strands here. And I did want to mention hooks, just because we do make these. So just like we talk about our stitch markers, of course, I have to mention the hook. If you have not tried our 3D printed hooks, they are specially designed for this type of yarn. They have a nice deep hook here to make sure that the yarn actually goes into this space and stays there when you're using it. It is more of an inline style, which is great for this kind of yarn because it's going to help you push through the stitches. And the best thing about these is lightweight. So, most of these and this is a 25 millimeter hook here, so you can see here. Most of the 25 millimeter hooks on the market are very, very heavy. They're usually wood or poured plastic, so they're a lot heavier. We 3D print these, we resin coat these. They're probably half or less of the weight of a lot of the 25 millimeters on the market. So if you really do enjoy working with this kind of yarn, but you struggle because the hooks are so heavy, the yarn is already heavy, and you're already having to kind of fight with the yarn, you don't want to be fighting with your hook. So that's an option if you enjoy this kind of yarn, to check out these hooks, because they may make the experience using the yarn a lot better for you. All right, so here we go. So I am going to, and this is the next tip. So the next tip is you're going to have to feel for your stitches. And you may have heard this if you've had, if you've read about using this kind of yarn, but you can't see them. You can't see your stitches when you're using this kind of yarn. So you're going to have to feel for them. So I can feel right here that this was my first chain stitch, and I'm going to work my way down until I can find that first hole that feels like a stitch. Now again, it's easier to feel for your stitches when you've already been crocheting for a while and you're comfortable with how stitches look and feel. So that's why I don't recommend this kind of yarn for a true beginner. I want you to have more experience being able to crochet. Like, one of the best ways to practice this is to try crocheting without looking at your work. So use an easier yarn to work with, use something where you can actually see your stitches and practice. And again, this is easier with bulky yarn. So if you're using really tiny yarn and a really tiny hook, it's going to be a little bit harder for you to feel for your stitches if you're not looking at your work. But if you're using let's say a super bulky weight yarn, a 6-weight yarn, and maybe a 9 or a 10 millimeter hook, practice making swatches and feeling for each stitch and not looking at your work. And that's going to give you a little bit more experience with how that's going to feel. And it's going to make working with this kind of yarn a lot easier. Okay, so I'm going to feel for my first stitch, insert my hook, pull up my loop, and again, I'm always making sure that I'm pulling up both strands of yarn over, pull through. And again, I'm only using single crochet for this jacket, which makes it a little bit easier. I'm going to give myself a little space here because when I finish the very first stitch of that row, I'm going to place a stitch marker. All right, and that's going to notate that that was that next row. All right. I'm going to work across. I have 6 stitches across, so there's no need for me to place stitch markers because it is such a small number. I can keep count or at least feel out the stitches. So there's 2. Feeling for the next one, 3. 4. 5. Oh, I can show you guys one of the knots. I know that I told you guys that there were knots throughout this yarn. There is one of them. So you can see, I actually, at first glance, I was like, oh, well, that's kind of, sad that it's like shaved yarn off of here to tie the knot. But I think that the purpose of that was to make sure that the knot was actually secure and just the thread. Because if you try to, it's not as bulky, it's not going to be trying to tie up the fuzz. So that's what that knot looks like. But I'll show you how, at first I was like, oh, you're going to be able to tell, that that's there, and you can't. So I'll show you guys once I pull that through. And I'm going to go ahead and finish this out and we'll show. Here we go. That's the last one. And if you are concerned, the good thing is if you get comfortable feeling for your stitches, I can count. So I know this was the last one, so that's 1, feel over for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and that's the one where I placed my first stitch. So let's see, somewhere in here is where that knot fell, and you can't tell at all. Like, there is no way for you to find where that knot was. I might be able to feel for it, but don't be concerned or distressed when you see those. If you purchase this yarn, it's not going to affect the finished look of your project. So that's the good news. All right, so I'm going to do one more row just so you guys can kind of see. And I think, let's see, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. I think this is row 14, so I think I missed a stitch marker in here. So I'm going to place this one. I think so. Again, that's why it's so important to pay attention to where you put these. I don't think that's right. I think that is row 13. I'm just going to move this over a little bit. All right, there we go. All right, so we're going to do another row. So I finished with that one. I'm going to turn my work. Well, let me chain one first. I'm going to chain one first and then turn my work. I'm just going to flip it over. All right, and then I'm going to do the same thing I did before. I'm going to feel for that first stitch space. There we go. And then I've got 6 across. So there's 2, And again, feel free if you have any other questions about this type of yarn, or, you know, if you've run into issues trying to use this kind of yarn, and you want to see if I've had some of those same issues, please feel free to pop that in the comments or put it in the question box, because there may be things that I haven't thought of. All right, I think that's, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. Got 2 more. 5. All right, and 6. There we are. Okay, there we are. All right, so for this one, since the last row I put a stitch in the first stitch, the last row in the first stitch, for the next one, since I worked it back this way, I would want to put a stitch marker in the last stitch of this row. So I can take my stitch marker and pop that on right there. There we go. And then I'm ready to go on to the next row. So that is how I handle this yarn, how I work with it. This is the progress on this jacket. It's getting there. I'm super excited. I think I only need 1 or 2 more rows for this first panel to be finished, and then I'll be moving on to the collar and the sleeves. And if you guys have not seen the Power Puff jacket, let me flip the camera around again and I will show you guys. Let's see. Bear with me. There we go. Oh, hello. All right, so let me move this a little bit. Move this here so that it backs up a little bit. Okay. So let me show you guys, in case you haven't seen it, what the Power Puff jacket looks like. So you'll see what I'm trying to make with the fluffy yarn. Now I made this jacket to go over like a hoodie, so it's an extra layer of outerwear instead of being something that you would just wear over, you know, like a tank top or something. And this one was designed using Bernat blanket, the biggest version of Bernat blanket at the time, which I think was just Bernat blanket big. And I can pull my hoodie out the back. There we go. So it's got the collar here. You guys can see the collar. And then it's got pockets. Now I don't know if I'll add pockets with the fur. I don't know yet. But this is what I am working on with the Very Plush Big yarn. So I'm making another version of this. If it looks like I'm going to run out of yarn, which again, I shouldn't, but this is something that, you know, happens sometimes with crochet patterns. You'll have one yarn that works up using a certain amount of yardage. You'll have another yarn that you end up needing more or less yardage. I think a lot of it depends on the stretch of the yarn. It depends on your gauge, your tension. But for this one, if for some reason I feel like I'm going to run out of yarn, I'm going to use a different type of yarn for the border. So this border that runs all the way along the back and along the bottom, I'll use a different type of yarn, and then I'll use a different type of yarn for the cuffs. So that will help me, you know, if I don't quite have enough of the furry yarn, I can, you know, add a different texture for the front, for the border, and for the cuffs. So I think that will work out really well. But that's it. If you have questions about that yarn, again, pop them in. I'm going to stay on a little bit longer. I have a couple of announcements for you guys that I wanted to share. The first being, and I announced this on my page a little while ago, but I finally got the Max jacket released. So I am going to show you guys the Max jacket in case you have not seen it. Oh, there we go. So this is based on the jacket that Max from the TV show Stranger Things wore in season 4. It took longer than I thought to get it released, but it is finally out there in the world, and you can find it in my Etsy shop. But I wanted you guys to have a more kind of up close look at it. I have a full tutorial for the zipper. If you've never added a zipper, there's a full tutorial video that you'll be able to follow, so you can see how I used the same yarn that I crocheted with to sew the zipper in place. So that was super helpful. I didn't have to buy anything extra except for the right size needle to be able to still get through here. And you can see my little knots here from where I tied off. Probably should have put them on the other side. That's okay. But it's got the nice stripe. This is a very track jacket feel. So you've got the ribbing on the sleeve. This is added after the fact. So the sleeves are worked from the top down, and then you add the ribbing to this. You don't have to sew it on. You actually add the ribbing to the sleeve. There's also a full video tutorial on how to do that, if that's something you've never done. And if you have never done that, if you've never added ribbing to the sleeve, it's going to be your favorite way to add ribbing moving forward. So you don't have to do sewing. You don't have to start from the ribbing. The jacket is worked from the bottom up. So the bottom ribbing, you start there and then you work your jacket up. And see, so with the zipper, I can get that up. And I do recommend, if you choose to add a zipper to your jacket, to get a plastic toothed zipper. So I got a metal tooth zipper, and I'm always kind of worried it's going to snag more easily on the yarn. So that's kind of a concern. It hasn't really, but that continues to be a concern for me, that it's going to snag. It has the pockets that are added after the fact. So you'll make your pocket and you'll sew the pocket on. I believe there's a video to show you how to sew the pockets on. If not for this jacket, I have one that shows you how to sew the pockets on another jacket, which it's the same method that I use for that. But that's what it looks like. So that is the Max jacket in all its glory. But it's available now. So super excited about that. I also wanted to let you guys know that I have the call for testers. I have a new pattern that's going to be going in for testing. It actually has started, but the application, I gave my returning testers an opportunity to apply ahead of time, so they've already kind of gotten started. But I'm going to do the public call for testers, I think, today on Instagram. So if you've wanted to test a pattern for me, I'll show you guys. This is the marshmallow cardigan. Let's see if I can get that to show you guys. So this is the one that is now in testing. And I still need testers specifically for the larger sizes. 2X, 3X, 3X, 4X, and 4X, 5X for sure. But I may still could bring on a few more people for the smaller sizes, but this is what this one looks like. So you've got your ribbing, same thing as the Max jacket. It's added after the fact. So you're going to work the body of your cardigan. You're going to add the ribbing after. You don't have to sew it on. You can see how it's attached to this, and I did not have to sew that into place. There's no ribbing on the sleeves for this one. I just had this one maintain kind of that fluffiness out to the arm, and then you have bottom ribbing as well. So I believe that the tester application is in the link in my bio. So if you're here on Instagram, go to my profile, click on the link that's in my bio at the top, and you should be able to scroll down. I think it's the second or third link. It should show test the marshmallow cardigan. So it's like application to test. So click on that. You can apply to test. The deadline is towards the end of February, and if you do end up needing a little more time, maybe it took longer for your yarn to ship, you just have to let me know. I try to be flexible there. But for this one, I used what was considered a jumbo weight yarn that called for, I think, from an 11 millimeter to a 15 millimeter, in that range. So we talked about this at the beginning of the video, how there is quite a large range of sizes for 7 weight yarn, so the jumbo 7 weight yarn, and this is on the smallest end of that. So you'd be able to find something that recommended anywhere from an 11.5 to a 15 millimeter hook to use for the body of the cardigan. And then the ribbing is actually super bulky 6 weight yarn held double. So the bottom part is actually Wool Ease Thick and Quick, held double, and then this part is Hometown Lion Brand Hometown yarn held double. And I used a smaller hook for this one. So you'll need a 16mm hook for the body or whatever you need to match my gauge, and a 12mm hook for the ribbing to make that nicer. So that's what it looks like. Super cozy, good campfire cardigan. It is layerable, so I don't know if I'd be able to put it over a chunky hoodie, but long sleeve shirt, thermal shirt, easy to put on there. It is a tapered sleeve, so it tapers down. It doesn't have like the balloon kind of style. But super excited about that one. So I'm hoping that this one can get released maybe in March. That would be a good timeline now that it's just going into testing. And last announcement, this year we are doing, I know that we're definitely going to do Halloween and Christmas mystery boxes again for 2023, but we always choose one other, you know, holiday to do a mystery box. And we chose Valentine's Day this year. So we are doing a Valentine's Day crochet mystery box. And if you haven't heard of our mystery boxes, they are not like the yarn subscription boxes that are out there. There's a lot of those already out there. We wanted to do something different. So our boxes do not have yarn, but they have a hook. So we always include one of our 3D printed hooks. They'll have a pattern that is meant for that hook, which will be a digital download that you can use the hook that you got in the box to create it. You can choose the yarn that you want to use. And that's the other thing. A lot of people are picky about the yarn they use. So it's hard for me to, you know, try to figure out what I would send. So I'd rather you get to choose what you want to use. I do have to say that the pattern for this one is going to be perfect for stash busting. So if you need a pattern that you can use to use up some of the yarn that's in your stash, it's a great one for like holding multiple strands together, making something that's really scrappy. So that's going to be in there. And then the rest of the box is just really fun stuff that I find that is either crochet related or holiday related. So like for instance, our Christmas boxes, you know, we've done ornaments for the Christmas box. We've done crochet tools, different notions like stitch markers that are themed for the holiday. And the big thing about this mystery box, so we decided to include one of our uncoated hybrid hooks. And if you don't know the difference between those, I'll show you guys. So this is one of our classic 3D printed hooks. So this is what I call them our classic because they were the first ones that we ever did. So they are all 3D printed and they have 2 coats of resin over them, which makes them super slick and easy to use with your yarn. Last year, we started making what we call our hybrids. So our hybrid hooks are very similar to a lot of the handles out there on the market when people create handles, but they have our same ergonomic design. And then we have the metal hooks, which give us more options for sizing because our classic hooks go down to an 8mm and all the way up to a 35, but we don't go smaller than an 8mm with the fully classic 3D printed hooks. So started making these so we had more options for you guys. We also have these in both boy and Bates options. So you see they're marked on the bottom, so we use the millimeter sizes on the bottom. But this is also resin coated, so these are the same price as our classic fully 3D printed hooks. But we decided we wanted to do something that was more of an entry-level option, and this is what we came up with. So this is 3D printed, but there's no resin on it. So that makes it a lot easier for us. We don't have to go through the process of sanding, resin coating, all of these things. We just get to print them, pop the hook in, glue it in there, and then you have that. So what we decided to do this year, because our mystery boxes are usually $100 a piece, and since we decided to go with an uncoated hybrid hook, which are less expensive for us, we get to do the Valentine's Day mystery boxes for 75 bucks. So if you're interested in a mystery box, you want to try one out, this is a great opportunity. Today is the last day to order. So if you go to our Etsy shop, you should see a listing. for Valentine's Day mystery boxes. You can grab yourself one. They'll ship out at the end of the month, so you'll have it before Valentine's Day. And it's just a fun way to treat yourself. If you just want something, you know, if you like Happy Mail and you want something that's crochet related, it's a fun option. So that's what we're working with. That was my last announcement for you guys. So check that out if you haven't. And I think that's everything for today. I'm so glad you guys joined me today. I hope that you found the tips for that yarn helpful. Last review, I think, I mean, I would get it if you want to try it. I mean, if you've been looking to try this kind of yarn, I've enjoyed using it. And I think, like I said, if you hold it double stranded with a smaller weight yarn, it's going to be easier for you to use. So if you've never used it before, it's a challenge, but if you have the patience, and I'm not a super patient person, so, you know, picking a simple pattern, simple stitches will make it a lot easier, you know, for you to use this kind of yarn. But again, this is limited edition, so if you want to try it, I would try it now. Make sure you get enough for a project that you want to make. You know, I only needed 3 of these. You can check the yardage if you want to try to make a fluffy Power Puff jacket like I am. If you go to my Etsy shop and you look at the Power Puff listing, look at the description, because all of my patterns on Etsy in the description tell you exactly how much yardage you're going to need for your size, and it's going to tell you the hook size. I've got all that info there, so before you even buy the pattern, you're going to know what you need, so that way you're not surprised. You don't have to buy it first. You can see if you have what you need first. So that's that. But I think that's everything. So thank you all so much for joining in. I should be back next Friday. Again, if you enjoyed this live, if you want to check in with me, I also go live on YouTube every Tuesday. So if you have not checked out my YouTube channel, it's youtube.com/pinksheepdesign, and you can join me every Tuesday. We talk about different topics. Sometimes I'll do crochet alongs as part of the live, so you can crochet something with me live. And like I said, for Fridays, I plan on bringing back my Pink Sheep and Friends maker chats, but it'll probably be a little while because I've got to get that ball back rolling, contact some other makers, see who wants to join me for the show. So for now, I'm going to try to think of some things that I can share. If there are things you'd like me to talk about, please let me know in the comments. If there are topics you'd like me to cover, if there's yarn that you'd like me to review, if there's anything you'd like me to talk about when it comes to super bulky yarn, jumbo yarn, any of that, just let me know, and I can make that a topic of a future chat. So thank you guys so much for joining me, and I hope you have a great weekend, and I'll see you soon. Happy hooking!